What's up, y'all? So today we're gonna do a biography slash memoir pairing. I'm gonna go in the order that I read them in. These are two books, and I'll be doing these here and there just because so many like memoirs slash biographies that I read, they can kind of be like connected in some way or like heavily refer to the other one. So we're gonna start off with Divided Soul by David Ritz. And then we're going to jump into After the Dance by Gaye and David Ritz. These books were a trip. So let's just start with Divided Soul. I want to say that this book was perfectly named. Based on everything that I read in that book, it did seem like Marvin Gaye was a very divided man. Like, he liked women, he didn't like women. He liked to be a star and in the spotlight and perform in some areas, but then he hated performing. He wanted money and sex and drugs, but then he was this spiritual man that didn't want to live this life of sin and didn't want to, shake his butt or whatever he said at the time. So it was like this push and pull with his life. Like everything seemed to be always conflicting. So that was kind of interesting to see. And I do see that in quite a bit of biographies. There's like this contradiction within ourselves that we all have as people in general, but it's really put on display in like people's biographies. So that was kind of cool to see. It goes over his life starting with like his childhood, his issues with his dad, his relationship with his mom, which the book kind of portrayed it to be this super beautiful, not really innocent, but beautiful, like adoration that he had for his mom. But there was some elements of that was kind of, questionable too for me, thinking like reading it as a parent myself. So it went over his like path to stardom, relationships that he had in the industry, his time with Motown and how crazy that was. Like Berry Gordy was a trip all by himself, but I'm sure if anybody know anything about Motown, you already know that. He was something. One thing that I want to point out though is this book to me was written like David Ritz, who's the author, didn't really like Marvin Gaye like that. Like, it seemed like he had a respect for him and his artistry. It seemed like he can appreciate the impact that he had on the world. It seemed like he could point out things that, like, he drew things out of the story that he knew us as readers would want to hear, whether we were fans, whether we were just interested, didn't know who the man was at all. Like, he pulled out things that were interesting to the reader. And you can tell he wrote it from a spot where he did have a certain level of respect for Marvin Gaye. But there were underlying themes of he just did not like that man. To me, it seemed like David Ritz was not that fond of Marvin Gaye. It seemed like they definitely had some issues. And even like how he's like describing certain situations, it seemed like the way that he worded it, or the way that he like his commentary on what exactly was said about Marvin Gaye was very much like he didn't really like him like that. But he did the best he could. He gave the people what they wanted. So what else is there? Yeah, it was interesting. You did kind of see this like up and down with Marvin Gaye's life, like the lows and the highs and the issues with his kids, his first and second wife, which his first wife was Berry Gordy's sister, and then his second wife was Gaye, which we're talking about her book next. Very interesting. Even his relationships with the people that he loved, like with the people Marvin Gaye loved, his relationships with them were very interesting. I don't want to give too much of it away, but like I said, this book is adequately named. He did have a division within him, so, which a lot of people do. His was just on display. But while going through it, some of the benefits or like the highlights of it, because it was crazy, y'all. It was crazy. Some of the benefits, though, was I did go back and get to listen to, like, all of the music when they were referencing, like, how this song was developed, the songwriters that helped on this. This was a remake of that. This won an award. This one didn't. Marvin liked this song. He didn't really care for this one. So that was kind of cool to go back and listen to that. And even when he was talking about his, when David Ritz was talking about Marvin's, like, season of doing duets, especially with Tammy Terrell, got to go back and listen to that. So that was pretty cool. I like that part of it. Let's talk about, before I jump into what I think about, like, David Ritz style, all right? And I'm going to jump over to After the Dance with Jan Gaye. This book, from the minute you start the story, you just are like, what? Jan Gaye was 17 when she met Marvin Gaye, and it was crazy from there. The issue, like, I couldn't really wrap my head around how every adult in her life was just like, she was so unprotected. It was so crazy. But yeah, the stories definitely cross paths, her book and his book. It was very interesting. Again, David Ritz helped her write this book, or wrote this book, or whatever. They co-authors on this book. And Jan talks about her life growing up, her relationship with her mom, her dad, her stepdaddy, what that looked like, how she, like, her perspective of the first time that she heard of or listened to or was a fan of Marvin Gaye, to meeting him for the first time. You did get to see his perspective of him meeting her for the first time too. And it was just so interesting to me. One thing I can say, though, is his book was crazy. Like, Divided Soul was crazy to me, but going through After the Dance, it was kind of hard for me to get through. I couldn't go through her book as quickly as I could Marvin Gaye's, because I was so disgusted. Like, I'm just like, you did what? He did what? He said that? Your daddy said that? Your mama said that? Marvin said that to you? You said that to this other woman? That's wild to me. Yeah, it was hard to get through. Your mama took you there. Okay, yeah. I was disgusted. And then, like, a lot of her book talked about sex and abusing drugs and using them. She didn't always call it abusing drugs. Like, it was certain parts of her book that just irked me as a mom and a child that's dealt with some stuff. I was just like, one thing that got me is when she told a story. I'm not gonna give it all away, but she told a story of something traumatic that happened on a boat, and the way that it was written was like zero accountability was taken, and that frustrated me to no end. Like, a lot of the book, it wasn't as reflective as I wanted it to be. Since she had a big part in writing it, I was hoping that it would be like, have some self-reflection, some accountability in there, some lessons learned, some, like, I don't know, anything, like looking at it from the lens of her children, because a lot of times where they were like describing some things that happened in the kids, like where the kids were involved, it wasn't even acknowledged how traumatic that probably was for them kids. So that kind of frustrated me. And nobody wants to paint themselves as a bad parent. Like, I'm not saying she was, but you can at least acknowledge how you can't always use the excuse like, I did the best I could. Okay, so I don't know, that kind of frustrated me. But other than that, she was honest. I wasn't there. It seemed like she was coming across as authentic. She told some stories of some of her wrongdoings too, but it was always framed as like, I did it, and like, and I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong, because maybe that's just her perspective, but I just wish there was like more opportunities for, like, you know, I'm reminiscing on what I did and how I did it, and if I could go back and if I knew what I knew now, I would have did XYZ. Like, I like that type of stuff in biographies and memoirs. But who am I? Also, it annoyed me because a lot of her, like, the way that she looked at Anna, which was Marvin Gaye's first wife, and her role and whatever that was, and then the way that she looked at these other women when she was married to Marvin, it's like, it's cool when you do it. It's a problem when they do it. Come on. But yeah, it was sad though. You can literally see the grooming that took place throughout this girl's and then woman's life. Like, you could see how she was groomed along the way, which was gross. Yeah, so it was hard to get through. Okay, so now I'm gonna talk about both of the books, like what they have in common. Both of these books, you can see a trail of abuse, a trail of just sexual, I don't even know if you want to call it freedom, but they did what they did, and they just did it all the time. So sexual something. You can see a trail of drug use and abuse, grooming. You can see clearly that Marvin knew how old Jan was. He didn't care. He also, when he married his first wife, she was 17 years older than him, but he was, 20 or 21 or something like that. But he knew Jan was 17 and didn't care. Like, and another thing, I had an issue that David Ritz, in certain parts of this book, he referred to her, when he was talking about her being 17, he referred to her as a woman. And I was like, no, she was a girl. Like, let's correct that and get that right. But that was one of my little pet peeves in there, because I'm like, 17-year-old woman, call it what it is. Another thing that you can see in both books is this theme of, like, seeking validation. For Marvin, it was more so from people he wanted to be exalted by the people around him. He wanted to hold all the control and the power. And in a way, that is kind of a reverse way to seek validation, because you want everybody around you to look at you like, he's the man. I need to go to him and ask for this. He, like, everything needs to revolve around him. That is a way to, seek validation from people. And it's showing, like, a lot of insecurities, which carries over to Jan's story. She sought validation from men throughout her entire life, probably stemming from a traumatic, abusive childhood where she was taken advantage of, not being protected by the adults in her life. She sought validation from Marvin. You can see that early on where she mentioned it too, like, her whole life was revolving around Marvin. What he wanted, how he wanted it, his way, his life, everything like that. So you did kind of see things of validation and, like, seeking things from other people in both books. Another thing that was present in both books is how crazy the music industry is. Like, we know it's crazy, but I feel like I only know, like, a teeny tiny piece. Like, the stuff that goes on is wild. Stealing credit, not giving credit, trying to, like, just like these petty tactics that you play behind people's back, exploiting people, using your body and your influence and your power to kind of get your way, like throwing these big temper tantrums. Marvin threw some temper tantrums, and it was just like, sir, can we use our words? Can we communicate? Like, and it just made me think about just how this industry operates is probably way crazier than anything that I ever thought, or anything that I can, like, fully fathom. So that was something that you saw in both parts. In both books. Another theme that you see in both, I know I mentioned, like, drug use and abuse, but both Marvin and Jan had really strong like themes in their book where they viewed drug use to the point of abuse. They still viewed it real casually. And I thought that was interesting. I mean, they were the ones doing it, but they've been surrounded by it their whole lives too. So it's kind of like, you can kind of see why they viewed it as like this casual thing. Like it was nothing for them, some of the stuff they was doing. And I was like, you don't think that reached that point where it's a problem? And they were just like, yeah, whatever. So I think that was kind of interesting to see that perspective in both of their books. Another theme that appeared in both books was like this theme of tragedy and childhood trauma. Marvin dealing with his dad and his interesting, I don't want to call it a weird relationship with his mom, but it was very interesting. It was very much like enabling. It's something about it that was just something to me. Anyways, his traumatic issues and lifestyle and upbringing with his dad, his relationships with his siblings, how that was always like strained in a way. Again, Marvin wanted to be the only one. He wanted to hold their future in his hands to a certain extent, especially his brother that wanted to be a singer. And yeah, and then Jan, I told you, just not being protected by any adult in her life, having to deal with a lot of abandonment issues and things like that. You kind of see themes of that in both books. And then sadly, they both books end in a very big tragedy. This is no spoiler, but if you think it is, you might want to stop it. It's about, I think everybody knows, it's public knowledge, but it might be a semi-spoiler. Marvin Gaye ended up dying because his dad shot him. So they both end like in that, with that large event, and it's just sad, man. It's just like, you just see both books kind of spiral out of control, and it's sad to watch that progression. So yeah, but both of those books, both memoirs, were very interesting. Definitely page turners, because it was so much stuff going on in them. It's like it was never ending. It was never ending. And then just to see like that duality, but in like the duality in Marvin Gaye. Again, a lot of people have it, but his was just like blown up, so we can really see like it was interesting. But if you're interested in these books and you're on the fence, I would say read them. Some of it might be triggering, but read it, because to me it was good. It was worth it. I'm glad I did. I like to go back when I'm when I'm reading books like this and listen to the music associated with it. I like to go hear, oh, that was the inspiration behind that song. Let me go back and listen to that. Oh, we talking about Tammy Terrell? Yes, let me go back and listen to that. Oh, that's where he got that. Let me go back and listen to that. So I was on a Motown binge for like a month. So that was cool. But yeah, if y'all read this, let me know what you think in the comments, because these books had me all over the place. Like, oh, I'm feeling nostalgic on one end. Oh, I'm like, where are the cops on this end? I'm feeling like sad for this girl on this end. I'm feeling bad for Marvin on this end. Then I'm mad at Marvin because I'm like, sir. Then I'm feeling bad for the kids, but then I'm like this and I'm like that, and then I'm like, oh, this is like a good time, or this is like this is that. So I was all over the place while reading these. If you've read them, let me know what you think. If you haven't, let me know, is it something you would read? Do you even like reading memoirs and biographies? And if you do, would you read these too? All right, y'all.